Time for the first demo in this module. We're going to add a map rendered by JavaScript on the employee details page, showing their coordinates on a map. For each employee, we can see the full details. I can click here on full details and then we see, well, the page with all the details of an employee. We also have on the employee type a latitude and a longitude, and that I'm going to use to show on this details page also a map that shows where the employee lives. But to show that map, I'm going to use JavaScript interop. I'm going to use from my Blazor code a JavaScript component that will get its data from my Blazor app. Let's see how we can do that. Let's start by creating the map component. That's going to be a regular component. So I'm going to start by creating a new Blazor component, and I think a good name for it is map. To draw the map, I'm going to use JavaScript. The JavaScript component, in fact, that I'm going to use requires that we use a div, and then JavaScript code will render the map. So I'm going to start by doing exactly that. The UI of this component will in fact be nothing more than a div, and then JavaScript code will render the map, well, in this div. You see that I'm still getting a red squiggly because I want to give this a random name. I'll do that in just a second in the component class. On this map, I will show a marker. We can add one or more markers. In our case, I'll just add one, which points to the latitude and the longitude on our employee class. I'm going to wrap that marker in a class. I'm going to use for that a separate class that I put in my shared project. Now, I don't want to put a marker in my domain folder. The marker really isn't a domain entity that I'm going to store. Hence, I'm going to create another folder here. It's going to be the model folder. And in there, I'll create the marker class. The properties on this marker class will be used to create a marker. We can enter a description, an X and Y coordinate, so the latitude and the longitude, and we can also pass in a boolean to say if we want to show a pop-up when we hover over it. Now go back to the component class of the map. On that map class, I'm going to create an element ID that resolves this red squiggly here, and I'm going to set that to a random string. Then I also pass in two parameters to this map component, a zoom level, as well as the list of markers. Let's bring in the correct using statement for that marker class. So far we've written some C# code, a few properties on our component. Now I'm going to bring in the JavaScript code that will render the actual map, and that will then call from Blazor. In the assets folder for M7, so this module, you'll find a folder and a JavaScript file. Copy all of this into the www.root folder of the Blazor project, that is. Let's take a look at what we have actually added. The most important one for us at this point is this delivery map.js. That will contain the code to render the map. Here you see that we're creating a show or update function. That requires an element ID, that will be the ID of the div, and a list of markers. So this will be the JavaScript function that will call from Blazor. I'm not going to show you all the JavaScript code. This is pure JavaScript code that will draw the map. So for us, we need to call this show or update from Blazor. So let's go back to our map component. And as said in the slides, when we want to work with JavaScript, we need to work with the IGS runtime. We can inject an IGS runtime just like we've done before. We don't need to bring any extra services in manually, so in the program class, it is known automatically by Blazor. So with that IGS runtime, we can now invoke our JavaScript function. It's important to do all JavaScript interop after the component has been rendered. For that very reason, we have an onAfterRender and an onAfterRender async. At that point, the component itself has been rendered, the HTML elements are there, and then our JavaScript code can work with the elements rendered by the component. So I'm going to use the onAfterRender async. Let's make it async first. And now in here, we're going to call the jsruntime.invoke void async. This is going to be a fire and forget. We're going to call the delivery map.show or update. That was this function here. We're not expecting any result back, so we can use the invoke void async. And we're also passing the element ID, that was that randomly generated string, as well as the list of markers. So with that, our JavaScript functionality is now invoked. We will see it render in just a bit. But of course, our JavaScript file, so the delivery map.js, as well as other files needed to render the map, such as CSS, need to be included. So I'm going to go to my index.html and reference those from the surrounding page. That is, in our case, the index.html. I'm going to bring in a CSS file that's included in that leaflet folder, this one here. And of course I bring in the delivery map.js, and I also bring in a supporting leaflet.js, which is also in that leaflet folder. At this point our component is ready, we can now use it. So let us now go to our employee detail component, and down here in this div I'm going to simply render my component. Let's do a build first so that Visual Studio picks up on the map component. And now we can use the map component. There we go. We will find that it had a zoom parameter. We'll set the zoom to 10 and we'll also pass in markers. We'll add a list of markers in just a second. I'm going to call that map markers. The employee detail component doesn't know about that just yet, so I'll create it here as a list of markers. And I'm going to get that list of map markers. It's going to be a list of just one element maximum using the following code. I'm going to check if the latitude and longitude have a value, and if that is the case, I'm going to add a new marker to the list with these values. All right, let us test this out. Let's click on employees, click on full details, and there we go. The map is showing using the latitude and longitude for this employee. It may be so that the JavaScript files aren't loaded on the first time. Make sure to do a hard refresh in your browser for the files to load correctly. As mentioned, we are using in the demo a component that comes from an open source project created by Microsoft, and we've used it here. You can find the original source for this component on the link you see here on the slide.